Hey guys, so in this video we're going to be talking about Stable Diffusion 3, the new license, all the stuff that's happening with Stability AI. Now I've been playing around with Stability's SD3M, and although it has its limitations, with quite a lot of careful prompting and with very careful settings, you can get it to do stuff. It can be fairly useful. And now with the new license, we should be able to do quite a lot more than we were before with this. So I'm gonna try to keep this as short as possible. If my voice sounds weird, I've had the flu, I've had COVID, I've had all of that fun stuff. Not 100%, it was a lot worse last week, but we'll try to get through this. Now I'm gonna try to raise some concerns first, and then we'll go to looking at some of the more positive stuff that's coming through. But there's a license update which came through last week, and this license update reduces the limits. It imposes fewer limits. There's a lot of changes introduced. It introduces less limits on the number of files that you can produce with the Stable Diffusion 3 model, and that completely changes things. It makes the model viable, in my view. There's also a change in the commercial license, and that's a huge change because we don't have to pay anything now to Stability AI unless we go for the enterprise license. Now in this section here, the new license is clearly very closely associated with the new acceptable user policies. There's a huge focus on safety, which began a while ago, and it continues. And they say if this license applies to you, as long as you don't use it for activities that are illegal or clearly violate our license or AUP, Stability will never ask you to delete resulting images, fine tunes, or other derived products, even if you've never paid Stability AI. But right now, anyone who's using the commercial license, unless they exceed the enterprise revenue limits, they can now just fill in the form. And once you fill in the form, there is no longer any need to pay the $20 a month. Now, I didn't feel the $20 a month was a lot to ask for, but now they're just asking you to fill in the community license. This gives them details of your company, who you are, and I think this is going to be used for marketing, so they can actually get to know what people are doing with the models that they're producing. Now, if you read some of the stuff that I tweeted out, they are very committed to open source, the new guys who took over, and the acceptable use policy is probably going to be something that I think some organizations might copy and paste into the website if they're accepting works from the general public. Because there's quite a lot of stuff here which you can't do. Some of it is clearly pretty sensible. You can't promote human trafficking, exploitation, sexual violence. There's some areas where it seems a little bit gray, so you probably want to read this yourself. Just make sure you're okay with everything here. We can't use this to develop nuclear weapons, so that's another provision. Now, once you sign up for that, you get access to the core models. And this is where I have some concerns here, because the core models don't include a number that we've come to expect. So we don't have, for instance, Stable Cascade. We've got Stable Diffusion 3 Medium, but we don't have the large version of the Stable Diffusion 3. Now, if you remember with Stable Cascade, which I think is better than Stable Diffusion 3M, the medium version, that was introduced back in February, and with that introduction it was released under a non-commercial license. Now this model, in testing it, I found it to be very, very good and better than SDXL in most respects, better than Stable Diffusion 3M. I mean, Stable Diffusion 3M can do landscape, it can do portrait much better than this guy. But this guy can produce images much larger than SD3M. So it is still under the non-commercial license. Whereas most of the other models that have been released on Hugging, they were released initially under non-commercial, then they were moved over to the core models and they became commercial. This guy has never become commercial, so it is still just research. Now, if we take a look at what happened in the past, this is going to be instructive as far as Stable Diffusion 3 Large. We had the release of Stable Diffusion XL Beta. This is the current model which is available on the core model scheme. It came out in 13th of April as an API for API customers. 13th of April 2023, so about a year before SD3 SD3 API came out. The model was then released 22nd of January as a beta. That was the 0.9 beta, and that was released also on Hugging Face. It's still on Hugging Face, and it is still under the research license. Now, I felt that this was a very good model. However, almost as soon as they released it under the research license, someone, quote unquote, leaked the model. Now, we don't know if it was a actual leaked version of the model. It could have been a corrupted version, could have been something with malware, but someone leaked it, and that's unfortunate. People shouldn't do that. But this one was leaked fairly soon after this was launched. And then we had the launch of Stable Diffusion XL coming out in July. So that came out 26th of July. So about several months after the launch of the SDXL beta, on the API, we then had Stable Diffusion XL coming out as open source on Hugging Face. Now, after the announcement of Stable Diffusion 3 February, we learned that there were several models for Stable Diffusion 3 ranging from 800 megs to 8 billion parameters. So several models, but we know that 8 billion parameter one is about a 24 gigabyte one. So that's the one for your RTX 4090s. And we learned that it also had a different architecture, different way of doing things. Then we had the launch of Stable Diffusion 3 API. That came out in April, almost a year to the launch of the API version of SDXL. And this is when we first got the chance to play around with this. Now here we got a few more details, and this new version, much more powerful, capable of doing things that you simply cannot do with SDXL, and certain things that you can't do with Stable Cascade either. And this one came out on the API. Now the API obviously is still available there. We still got the Stable Diffusion 3 Large and the Turbo, both of those available, fairly expensive at 6.5 cents for each image. And I don't expect that to change, but the API still has that option. You can still use the large version. You can use it with Stable Assistant. And there's a lot of other good stuff as well, which has been introduced. So this is a very good service. And if you're using this, you don't have to have the equipment. You can run it inside of ComfyUI. And it is very useful also if you don't want to take on the security risks. We've seen some security concerns about not just leaked versions of stuff, but some custom nodes for ComfyUI have had a few issues with them, really severe safety issues. Something maybe I will do another video about later. And we know that SDXL 1.0 came out on the 26th of July. So if we were to follow the same timetable for the release of SDXL 3 Large, we would see the release of SDXL 3 Large around at the end of this month. I don't know if that's going to happen. It's obviously 100% the decision of Stability AI when they release Stable Diffusion 3 Large as open source. If they ever do, I mean, the new investors may not want that. I'm not one of these people who tries to force companies to do stuff that they don't want to do. If they don't want to release it, they don't want to release it. But those of us who've been investing in equipment to run these larger models, we've been waiting since February for the large models. So let's take a look at some of the more distinctly positive stuff. Now, in the license update, there's a lot of information. I'll urge you to read this yourself, not just rely on me. There's a mention here that Stable Diffusion 3 Medium is a work in progress. That's true. We aim to release a much improved version in the coming weeks. And this idea of continuous improvement, this is something they've spoken about before. So they're not just releasing a model and then that's it. We now have got the ability of people to do their own fine-tuned models. It's no longer just a weird contract which just made everything impossible. And let's take a look at that contract in a little bit more detail. So one of the things that I saw and which caught my eye in the contract was you will not use the Stability AI materials or derivative works or any output or results of the Stability AI materials or derivative works to create or improve any foundational generative AI models, excluding the models of derivative works. It's a difficult word. Excuse me there. I think this is a very specific use case, which if I was an investor in Stability AI, if I was one of the new investors, I might want something like this in the terms and conditions. But they do say quite clearly, ownership of derivative works as between you and Stability AI. You are the owner of derivative works you create subject to Stability AI's ownership of the original materials. Basically, that clears up quite a lot of confusion. We're seeing more emphasis on compliance with the acceptable use policy, but we are seeing, I think, less of a focus on things that just didn't make sense. And those things that didn't make sense, probably the company was running out of money and just needed to get something together very quickly. And talking of investors and the new management, the new investors, there's about half a dozen, 80 million, 100 million. And these guys are in for the long term. So one of the guys who you guys seem to know more about than I did is Sean Parker, who's the Napster and Facebook guy. I did a little bit of background. He's actually got to be a billionaire from Facebook, but he is actually quite critical of Facebook. And he says the site was made to exploit human vulnerability. But he's critical of Facebook. He's not someone who's enthusiastic and all. And you can kind of see that maybe in the acceptable use policies, they kind of chime in with some of the criticisms that have been made of Facebook and these other social media sites. So it's all kind of coming together. He's also been involved with Spotify, which is a good model for commercializing talent, making sure that everyone gets their money, the copyright holders, the people who distribute this stuff. So it's kind of all coming together in a way that makes sense. And I think Stability AI has been moving towards having new investments, new managers who really understand the industry and can make use of all the assets, but also take care of some of the copyright issues. And I think this is where the new managers are coming in.